Hello and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rhyland. I am here to dive in to find out what makes ambitious people live the way they do. And today's a bit of a different story. It's about my ambition. It was about me being a bodybuilder. This episode I call the story of a wannabe bodybuilder because there's a lot of challenges that came up with it. I formerly was a competitive boxer, and once I lost that, bodybuilding was something I was afraid of, but I ended up diving into, and I ended up enjoying part of the process and just the accomplishment of it in and of itself. And I dive into a little bit of my initial competition, and then I talk about how I tried to seek out really new dietary styles. I tried the carnivore diet, tried an appropriate bulk and a progressive cut. I did a lot on my own, but there's so many challenges that came up along the way. So this episode has got a lot. What I had done is an Instagram live just recently, and I recorded it so I could also flip it into the podcast. So I'm not going to spend too much more time introducing myself. So we can dive right into this. And here is the Instagram live and my story as a want to be bodybuilder. So fundamentally, what I'm doing here today is I had called this the story of a wannabe bodybuilder. And the reason I called it the story of a wannabe bodybuilder is simply because that's where I've been spending my life in the recent years. Since I realized I wasn't going to box, the biggest challenge for me seemed to be about trying to improve my physique, right? It wasn't just about competition as far as showing up in boxing. That was very performance-based contest. And that was very easy for me to have a mindset to challenge that, to show up, otherwise you're going to get your ass kicked. And then my physique honestly always started to waver. The only time I really would show up is if it was a public event. And so if I had to look good for a public event, then I would try to look good. So that told me something about where my mindset was with my mindset of being competitive for my physique. And so, this was 2 or 3 years ago. I think now it would have been just over 2 years ago. And I started getting closer and closer to wanting to try it. I had experimented with what the diet would look like for prepping for a Halloween costume. And then, I just came in passing with the girl I was seeing at the time. She had mentioned it. I ended up dating this wonderful gal, and she was intrigued by it. And so it was interesting because, some of my previous partners weren't very interested in the bodybuilding, but she kind of was. Okay, I'm getting a bad timing. Getting a phone call, not a good timing. So it was really great because in that moment, I started to believe I had some support. And so then I went and seeked out my great mentor, AJ Zeglin, and he was there to help me with, basically I thought because I was doing athletic training, I wasn't doing really bodybuilding, because the bodybuilding show is more of just a cutting challenge than anything. And you see where your body's at when you're cut, right? And then they would say this or this is big or small, and they're going to pick you apart there. But at an amateur level, you just got to show up and prove that you can get lean. So I did that, did the first show. It was really challenging. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later, as one of the questions has to do with that. But the reason I'm talking about this is because, I took a year off to recoup one of my shoulders. And then a year ago, when COVID first hit, I went into this experience of the carnivore diet. And the carnivore diet was really interesting because the carnivore diet was so out there. I didn't believe it until I started hearing some of the research that they had to support it. And there were some very interesting thoughts. So I thought, why not try it? Try it for 3 months, see what happens. And I just discovered how much I loved that style of eating. I loved how much freedom and guidance that had. And it opened my mind to so much. And because of how hard cutting was for bodybuilding, because it was debilitating hard, like you wake up and you live at a 3 or 4 out of 10 when it comes to energy. But when I did the carnivore diet, I was higher calories, but I enjoyed that process. I enjoyed the food, and that was very different. So hearing some bodybuilders that had done the carnivore approach previously, I thought it was a great idea to okay, you know what, I'm going to do the building process carnivore, and then I'm going to, do the cut and everything. And I did some of the processed carnivore, but I ended up going back to a fair bit of plants throughout the winter. So this is where I'm going to kind of explain a lot of what I thought was really the interesting experiments for me, because it was experiencing what a bulk would be like. And bulking in and of itself, you have to do very methodically, because there's the clean bulk and there's the dirty bulk. And so clean bulk is what a lot of bros, if you will, a lot of people will do when they're just going to lift heavy and it's winter and I don't care, my shirt's not off, so I'm going to eat whatever I want. And, there's no consequence to it. But a clean bulk is really being pretty health conscious throughout that whole process. And I was pretty health conscious. I had, not gonna lie, a handful of fat kid days, I like to call them, where I just eat till it hurts, but far less than I ever used to. I was very attentive with even tracking my calories when I was going up. But I didn't really know it until later, but I bulked too much. I certainly got thicker. I had bigger arms, all that stuff. That was great, but it was too much, and trying to do even that too fast. It should be done on a natural level, because I'm a natural athlete. If you're doing it on a natural level, you should do it very progressively for about 2 to 3 years, not try to build up in the winter and then immediately cut, because then you're actually literally practicing a yo-yo diet. So to get myself out of this, I was aiming to go, pretty high in calories. I thought I'd built up my metabolism enough, and I felt bigger, but a lot of it was bulk, which kind of is, fat and muscle, but there was a lot of fat with it. But I brought my calories all the way up to about 3,500, 3,400. I was like 2220 or 2223 at the highest. So it was quite a bit heavier. So almost 20 pounds got put on. And I bring that down progressively. So I wasn't just racing down. My thing was about 5-month cut was hopefully going to work. And it was harder to get used to that. But I went, from our basically high end of calories were 32 to 3,400. And every 2 to 3 weeks, I would make adjustments. Closer to about 3 weeks, I would make adjustments to cut it down 300 calories or so at a time. And as I was doing this cut, it was, very progressive. It seemed all right. And it was interesting. You always had to adapt your appetite to this new level. So that was really cool. I was still lifting. The program, strength training, was all fun throughout that experience. But this is where it gets interesting, because right around the point where I was, because I started this cut back in around February, March is where it really began. I think it was March. And from there, I started to realize, when everyone else, because the bodybuilding show was supposed to be in May, and I started to notice a lot of people were, looking a lot leaner and all this stuff. And I kept saying to myself, well, I have a different metabolism. I am a bigger body. And so I had to accept that. A lot of these guys are probably going to bulk a lot longer, and some of them aren't natural. But then I started to get really worried. Luckily, the show got moved. So the show got moved into July. And so that was tough for me, but it was okay, because during COVID, during the lockdown, not really a big deal to have to kind of pull back and to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to focus on my health and this challenge of the bodybuilding. So it was supposed to be July, I think, 17th. And so this was kind of a blessing for me, because again, I had said I bulked too much. And so I went to, progressively reduce my calories, continuing to reduce them. And then the whole plan was, when you started to reduce, because I would get down to about 2,000 to 2,200. And then I was even shifting my protein to energy ratio. So eating more of a carnivore style diet, what you can do is you protein leverage. So you have more than enough grams of protein. So let's say my body only needs 175 grams. The excess grams of carbs can be stored as glycogen. And that's why I never really felt low energy. But once you start going in too much into taking your fats out, then that can affect your hormones. So you kind of want to do this very slow and progressive. And some people don't do it, but some people do really prefer it, because protein has a high thermic effect, and it's also pretty good for satiety, but there's a breaking point. I'll talk about that later, but basically I went from 70 to 30, shifted into 50-50 protein versus energy, and then I went to 70-30 way too soon, meaning 70% of my calories was protein and 70% or 30% was fat. And I went into that way too soon. And I started to get in my head. This is like when the show was still supposed to be on, basically would have been last weekend. And I think this would have been somewhere around May, June-ish. And so again, I'm just getting really insecure about my physique. I constantly am doubting whether or not I can make this show, constantly wondering if I'm doing this right, constantly wondering maybe I should have cut my calories sooner. Man, shouldn't have bulked so much. And I think this was like one of the biggest points. I'm going to talk about all the things I learned throughout this adventure, but doing this alone was so hard, because you very few. My girlfriend would hear me just chatter away at all these issues that I don't know if I'm doing right, and I didn't really get a chance to seek out a coach or anything like that. I tried way too much on my own, and so going through it, it was challenging. And then right around the first move was good, and right before the second date officially moved, I was like, you know what? I know the carnivore approach was supposed to be like easier and all that stuff. I'm going to go hard bodybuilding style, cut my calories, and do a ton of cardio. And I did that for about 3 or 4 days. And then I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I actually had my barbell set up on chairs in my living room. And it was already kind of an unstable setup, but I watched it collapse and it almost hit my TV and I didn't move because I was too tired. I was like, well, this is going to suck if it hits it. But the right after that, I said, okay, well, I can't go that far if I'm not in, really good shape, necessarily competitively wise for this next event. I'm honestly okay with it because this is where I actually lack as a bodybuilder the most. I don't care that much. I care a lot about my physique. I care a lot more than most people do, for sure. But I'm not so insecure that I want that much suffering, right? So that's why I was always trying different techniques because I like my physique. It doesn't even need to be that much better. I just want it better than what it usually is. And so for me to sacrifice my ability to do my job, show up for my clients, get new clients, like all that stuff, that's a huge cost. And so it was, a huge point for me to say, okay, I'm going to reduce them a bit and see where my physique goes. And I probably, even if the show would have been on, I probably wouldn't have done super well, but I think I would have done pretty well. Better than my first because it would have been bigger, but I don't know if I would have necessarily been leaner because I knew the rate I was doing it was slower. It was intentionally slower. It was healthier. But at the same time, I was doing high protein versus energy ratio still. And they moved the show. And so this is right after I'm like, oh man, I thought I was actually going to have to dive into this again. And so this is when we heard about the extension of the lockdowns and all that stuff. So one of my clients was actually having a hard time taking his diet serious. And I had already, when the show was still on, told him, you know what, you have a hard time cutting. Let's challenge each other. I'm going for this cut anyways. We're going to check back in a month or so here. We're going to see who's better. Let's bet 100 burpees on it. Let's see who can do it better. And he's a younger kid. He's 19. It's kind of funny. I think he was eating maybe 200 to 400 calories less than me, and he weighs 40 pounds less than me. So he was also an athlete, boxing athlete. So he needs more energy, but I was trying to do also a much more accelerated rate. But I still had this agreement with them, and so they canceled the show. And after they canceled the show, I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to keep on this because I'm in a good groove. I finally got a relationship with, I'm going to improve my physique to wherever I can, and that's okay. I don't necessarily need to go all the way to July 17th, and that's okay. Let's go to the start of the summer, look good for the summer, right? And maybe do a photo shoot, which was always really one of the main plans, and keep it going with my client. And that's exactly what we did. So me and my client went up to June 17th. We compared a body composition. I did better than him in the skin folds. If we combine two different measurements, I didn't do as good, but that's, it's the one form of measurement. Waist, neck, and height is always a very biased one on me just because of where I carry my weight. But either way, we kind of considered it at a time we both did 50 burpees. But it was a great thing because what I then did was I transitioned my focus for the first 2 weeks because I had a source of accountability. And that's always really important for me because I always say, it's if you don't have a why not is really easy to say. So someone says, would you like another drink? Why not? Would you care for a piece of cake? Why not? How about another one? Why not? And if you have a why, then why not is really easy to answer. So I had a why. I wasn't going to let him beat me. I've challenged clients before. We usually end up pretty close to a tie, and it keeps me accountable, keeps him accountable, and I wanted to show up good for a photo shoot. And so what I actually tried that was really cool was I tried intuitive eating. And so basically I'm a tracker. Like I like to stick to the apps as a baseline guide. So if there's some days I'm around, that's why I say I was usually at 2,000 to 2,200. I give that range, maybe even up to 24 on the tough day. And I give that range on purpose because I even with the physique, even with trying to push it, if it's going to make me dizzy, if I'm going to feel weak, it's okay to feel a little hungry because that's just a signal. That's just, normal appetite can actually pull us into that. But the actual starving hunger, that is only experienced in people who haven't eaten in days. Starving is not a reaction that most of us have any comprehension to feel. We're capable of a fair bit. And I learned that the first time I did bodybuilding, how much you could go and still do a decent amount. So I would always kind of be in that range. But then I was like, well, if I can't track, then I really have to feel it. I have to feel like it's enough, but not too much. And at the same time, I'll also say that I was doing cardio at this point. I was always doing at least two 10 to 15-minute walks in the morning at night, even throughout the winter. But in the summer, more into the spring, into the start of the spring, I was doing more walks routinely. And those got quite long. I found it was better for me to do longer and slower. So it wasn't really exhausting. It wasn't super high heart rate. But, it was also very time consuming. And I'm going to go into how that's a bit of a mistake in and of itself. But that was kind of the cool experiment with doing. I would do my cardio. I would eat what I normal visually would actually do. And that was pretty cool because then I'd be like, okay, this looks right. This feels right. I didn't have to put anything in any calculators. I ate really the similar food. And so at the end of it, I would be able to say, wow, yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what happened there. Like, I think that was right. I think there was a right amount of food. But I got, a little worried after a week or so. It wasn't, maybe the weight loss wasn't as fast, or I just, as a bodybuilder, you get in your head constantly. So you're kind of worried. And so after about 2 weeks of intuitive eating, and I knew I had 2 weeks left in the challenge with Alec, and I had with my client, and I also had a photo shoot that I planned. So I wanted to look good for the photo shoot. So in the last 2 weeks, I cranked it back up to doing tracking and to doing a fair bit of cardio. At this point, I'm around 2,000 to 2,200, depending on the day. And I was doing 40 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes at night of slow, steady state walking. The walking wasn't hard. I would wake up, put on a podcast, maybe even do work on my phone. Like I say, I don't even want my heart rate high. And I found that was actually pretty good. And then at night, 40 minutes, and it works. Like, I lost weight. I would do strength training. I wouldn't even worry too much about super high volume, just the volume my body felt good about. So some days it was 3 sets. Some days it'd be like, okay, let's really pump it up and go for 4. But it's kind of an interesting thing when you're doing, physique and you're trying to cut and stuff. You could argue you don't need a lot of volume because you're not going to gain size if you're in that much of a deficit. Like there's an extremely improbable amount. So I'd like to experiment with that down the road. But at the end of the day, I ended up getting on skin folds, my body fat was below 10%. So I'm proud of that. The show looked good. Not the show. It wasn't an official show. But the photo shoot went good. So that was really good. And I was happy with the results. But there's some very key lessons I like to share here. So as I had said earlier too, is the intuitive eating was so good because now that's where I'm going to live, right? I don't want to live by the app. I want to learn from apps. I want to learn from the calories. And so, even today, I think in my head, oh yeah, I probably had somewhere around 1,200 calories, and it's okay if it's plus or minus 100. For the most part, if you're going to try to be in a maintenance, you could probably do that intuitively. It's knowing what's too much and knowing when you're going for appetite versus actual hunger. That's a hard thing. And intuitive eating is a practice. And that's where I think apps can be good, going in and out of them, practice with them, practice without them, and find that ballpark range. So that was a really good lesson because I had never really tried to appropriately be structured and to even intuitively cut. One of the guys that I learned a lot from was Kevin Stock, and he mentioned how he did a bodybuilding show all intuitive eating. And it blew my mind that he was able to do this. So I am very fascinated with how he's been able to do it. So that's why I really want to try this more, because that's everyone's goal, is to just have a feeling sense. So that was great. And recognizing when I don't need to eat something, it even happened to me last night where I got home. It was a Sunday night. I always think this is the funniest thing about how we feel our diets really go. Oh yeah, I'll be good all week. It's a fresh Monday. The fresh Monday attack. And so Monday's usually pretty good for some of us, and Tuesday, okay, it's getting a little tougher. Wednesday's a little tougher, but we're okay. Thursday, okay, it's the last day, and then tomorrow's the weekend. Friday, all right, let's have a few. Okay, that was too many. Not so much on Saturday, but it's the weekend. Saturday night, it's the weekend. It's whispering to you, it's the weekend. And so you have a bit more, and then you're like, okay, Sunday, I got to eat clean. It's Sunday, but it's the weekend. So it's like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all the weekend to you. So really, you're 4 out of 3 days that are actually going good. So my whole point is, last night, I finally had this conscious thought of, you really know you don't need this. You don't need to go even have a protein shake right now. You don't need to have another protein bar, even if it is healthy, it's more calories. I had a good meal during the day and went to my parents for dinner. So I knew I didn't need anything. It was a thought of enjoyment and stuff like that. So that was appetite. So that was a very and to be able to carry that practice over was so important for me, because now I have no inherent consequence, right? I had thought about doing the bodybuilding show that got moved from July 17th all the way to October. But I'm going to talk about how that just doesn't really fit into what I've learned from this. The other thing was, protein for satiety is just so powerful to me. Carnivore taught me that initially, but I think what I found was a sweet zone where I find fats and carbs can be so hard to kind of tell. And I've heard from someone talk about how 50% of your energy coming from protein and 50 from carbs or fats is actually kind of a nice sweet zone for satiety. Sometimes if you go too far into too much protein, you're going to crave the other micronutrients if you don't have enough protein. So it probably is anywhere from 30 to 50%. For me, I found 50% is a really nice number. And I might change, my appetite changes. So I just found, even when I try to put more fat into my diet, it doesn't inherently feel as good as just that right amount. And then I do like carnivore, but plants have a very hormetic effect for me. I found that I'm almost too limited in what my body's capacity can take. So plants have microtoxins in them. Everything has a microtoxin in it. And so the carnivore community gets really up in arms, like, oh, they have this, this, and this. And it's like, well, not all of it actually affects you. It's how much it affects you, right? And some people, like things like oxalate, phytates, like all these things, that autoimmune issues come from this. Absolutely. But that's not me. Like, I was fine eating plants before. I had none of those. And so the only thing I find with plants is they give you this hormetic effect where now when I eat certain meats, because I went from the carnivore, I'm actually less adaptive to something slightly undercooked or overcooked. And, if someone ever wants to go carnivore and stay carnivore, then that can work. But I don't want to stay carnivore. I want to have a lot of, and there's more variety. There's more flavors that come from the plant. So that was something I've definitely learned. When it goes to a bodybuilding show, and if it was the last month, I think just because of how light you feel, there's not a lot of mass in you, I probably would do it again. But I would not live that way, for sure, not necessarily a lifestyle for myself. So then the other thing is, and this is another reason that'll come back to why I decided to not do the bodybuilding show in the fall. And this decision was made like 2 days ago, maybe, or just before the weekend. Bulk slow is so important. If you're going to put on mass, it's not like bulking in the winter and cutting in the summer, bulking, and it's actually that might be a slow yo-yo, but it's a yo-yo all the same. So bulking, has such this kind of it's such a bland term. It's like I'm bulking or cutting. And realistically, it should be, I'm going to build muscle. Like we should just say those words. And I also love that I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Actually, not enough people talk about this, I should say, because some people will usually tell you you should just focus on one. You should just focus on cutting or building. And now I'm hearing a lot more of the arguments the other way. It's recomposition. And that's what I really want to do with the slow bulk, but it's slowly putting on mass and maintaining the lowest body fat percentage I can, which is what everyone should want to do. But how slow that is what I didn't even realize, because my body is so efficient. And by efficient, I mean, when I eat, it wants to build with it. Now, if I don't have, like, it can build some muscle, but muscle is very challenging to build. Even with my physique, it's a challenging thing. So if I have excess calories, which doesn't take too much for me, then it goes into fat mass. So basically, because my body can run, even though I'm 206 pounds now, 208 pounds, if I were to run off of 2,200 calories, that could be a maintenance almost for me. I don't burn a lot of calories in a day, and that's that, fast metabolism, slow metabolism. So basically an efficient versus inefficient system. And my system is very efficient. So it'll be very anabolic. And I have to take responsibility for that, which means my bulking cannot be as high as it was for as long as it was. I have to really, in some regards, earn that. I've got to put on more mass in order for my body to make it inefficient. I want to make it build. And this is something I talk to a lot of my clients about. And this is the funny thing too, is like, I talk to my clients about it, but I don't drink my own punch. And so this is something I got to do more, is if I try to, now I even did try to go pretty slow, but I know I can go slower. And I think I want to do probably maybe even a good year of just not worrying too much about the physique. But how many of us practice some maintenance? And I've been preaching this for a year now, but now again, I preach it, but I don't practice it. But now I want to practice it for a good year. Own your weight. I heard someone say that the other day, own your weight. And I heard another guy say, what if I lose 1 pound of fat a month? Well, think about the process to get there. It doesn't sound too invasive, but if he does 1 pound a month for a year, he loses 12 pounds with a lifestyle that he wants. And if he's doing a lot of weight training, imagine that pound of fat is being replaced by body mass, by muscle mass as well. This is like the lifestyle process then, right? So that's so important. I think probably one of the most wise words I've ever heard when it comes to fitness and training came from Ryan Savage. I can't preach this enough. I'm going to say it the rest of my life. He was talking about winning or losing as a boxing athlete and how challenging that is. And he said the process is the result. Because what you should do is you should be proud of what you're doing and how you're becoming a person in that. But when he just said the word, the process of the result, it just lit a light bulb in my head. Everyone has to realize that is life, that it doesn't matter if it's fitness, food, your career. There's no end game. Like, we don't just stop and that's it and you stay there. It's always a process that you end up resulting in, right? Like, you get to, oh, this is the process you're living now, right? And so I really got to own that more and more. And even though, like, I always go to the cardio and stuff like that, I got to do more slow cuts. I got to take my time with this more progressively. And the other big lesson I did learn, I'll say that I quit weed. Now, it's not forever, but that was a huge one. And I respect anyone who smokes weed. By all means, I loved it. But that was a problem. That even something so simple as weed, as pot, like that, relaxes me so much. And the fact that it seemed so innocent was what made it dangerous, is that I could use it at night to relax me and go to bed. Well, why can't you do that anyways? Because I would always lead to 2 to 3 extra 100 calories. And I did better than I used to. They used to easily equal to triple the food at night. It didn't matter how hard I tried. It took me probably a decade before I somewhat controlled it. And now just getting out of that habit has been quite huge for me. I feel much more in control of my willpower without it. And I think I probably will eventually go back to it, but I did oath everyone on social media that it would go at least 6 months, probably go longer, because it's been good for me, for sure. And so, yeah, enjoying the process is so important. So if you're, anyone listening and you're thinking about, I want to lose weight, I want to get to a certain place in lifestyle, you like, it's that 1%, that 1 to 4% kind of modification that you want to look at. It's like, again, think about what I had mentioned about, imagine just losing 1 pound a month, but coming with, maybe you get a half a pound of muscle mass, which is a lot, by the way. Muscle mass, you can't really track easily. I track my lean mass versus fat mass, and it's not the same. Lean mass could be water retention, food, anything. If you see a big change in lean mass and not in fat mass, then you can associate that with muscle, in my opinion. But if they both kind of come down, that doesn't mean you've lost muscle tissue all the time. But my point here is, I think enjoying the process, I did enjoy the process, but the part of the process that I know I've just always done too much of is the cardio. It's like a quick fix. And so I cut really well this year. I got to possibly one of my best physiques ever. Even if you're going to compare my bodybuilding physique, that I was the leanest I ever was, and I was very proud of that physique, I was thicker and I was more defined, my shoulders, everything pretty, like, I really took a couple of years to build up a lot. I had an injury within there, so I wasn't constantly building, but I did a lot of building. So if I would have been leaner, it would have been even better. But either way, I was very happy with my physique. And I didn't really go off the rails like I normally do. Like when I did the first bodybuilding show, I went off the rails. Like I knew all of these notions, all of these ideas that people talk about, where it's like, oh, you got to be careful of the rebound weight. You got to be careful of that rebound weight. It's so hard after a show. You got to be careful. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be careful. I'm going to be careful. And then what I do, I booked a trip to the United States of America with my best friend and another buddy to drive across the states and then to party throughout all of, the cities we could. Not only did I just not even have the energy for that trip, but you're on the road. How could you possibly eat normal food? So I actually attribute this kind of ratio roughly. For every week that I spent torturously doing cardio and eating like, suboptimal calories, 1,600 calories a day, which is really low. For every week I did that, it took me 1 day to get rid of it. And so it was 12 weeks, 12 days. I was back to square one. Now, this time I was, and even last year, I've been better where I actually do really enjoy my food. My energy is not so low that I'm so starving, but there's still this anabolic, efficiency that my body has that I just have to take responsibility for. And if I try to use cardiovascular work that I'm not going to sustain, and if I try to use so low calories that I cannot sustain for the next week, I'm going to gain it back, like without even doing anything drastically bad. I haven't had what I call a fat kid night. Later on, you'll hear about my confessions of a fat kid on another podcast. But basically, like normally, if I would be, done whatever I'm prepping for a good week or so after, I would be smoking weed and I would be eating food in front of TV thinking, well, nothing matters for a while and I'm in good shape now. And it only takes me, again, for every week, it's about one night or 1 day of bad eating. It can be that fast, and I have that big of an appetite, especially when I smoke weed. But I finally was controlling that instinct. I was just enjoying myself, but not trying to stuff too often. There was a trip here and there, but I honestly thought I was going to do a better job. And sure enough, it came back a fair bit of the weight, not all of it. So I'm about 208 now. So I went from 223 pounds. When I weighed in for the actual the photo shoot day, now bear in mind I was dehydrated as well. I was all the way down to 193. Now after the hydration, it was probably around 197, 198. So, over 25 pounds cut and, about 8 pounds put back on. So now hopefully, and the funny thing is this is where my body's comfortable. I've always said around 206, 207 is where my body just stays. Like it just loves this weight. So in order for this weight to be different, I have to do something different with it. I have to do something different with its instincts. So that's been a really important lesson for me. Lifestyle, workouts, food. So for all of you, if you're ever trying to think about how I'm going to get somewhere, It just has to be slow and enjoyable. So enjoy I'm going to say baseline weightlifting. There's not a person or, a consideration that won't benefit at a baseline for your fitness to be strength training at least 2 to 3 times a week, a minimum. Now, it could be just 2 to 3 and doing other activity. I'm not saying you have to do it 5, 6 days a week. Like, I love lifting, but I mean, for myself, I'm going to really embrace that. I embrace love lifting. I'm going to be doing, probably right now, I'm in a high volume phase, but I'll always be trying to go towards strength, progressive overload. That makes you very involved in it, right? If you work out to work out versus working out and training, it's a much different mindset. So I go in, it's like, what did I do last week? Okay, let's see if I can do more weight or more reps. That's progressive overload. And trying to do that is what's going to make it a stimulus on the body to grow something new, to do something different. But if you just go in and do reps, okay, this kind of burns, this kind of burns, this kind of burns, the body might do some adaptation, but it also might kind of go up and down and go left to right. You're not getting it in a general direction. And it also isn't as enjoyable for you. When you start seeing numbers, you start seeing weight that's twice your body weight, and to be able to lift that many times off the ground, that's beyond empowering. Who doesn't enjoy that idea? And from there, when it comes to, I talk about lifestyle too, because both the workout, if you're going to do conditioning, it has to be something you enjoy. And I'm going to talk later about the benefits of different aerobic zones, because that was one of the questions. But I loved my walks, honestly, because, like, being COVID, I just needed to get out more, and morning walks, evening walks, I think they're really healthy. At least one walk a day, I think, is very healthy. But at the same time, I'm going to literally try to do my next progressive cut without any walking other than, 20 minutes, maybe a day. Like, I'm not going to allow myself to do that anymore. And I recommend yourself, the only way that you should really do any extra cardio work is the things you really love to do and you're always going to love to do. You have a sport, awesome. Keep your sport consistently. If you like high intensity interval training and you're always going to do that the rest of your life, by all means, careful how much you do it, because it's very exhaustive on the system. And I can't tell you how many times people will be like, oh, well, this burns so many calories. Don't do it because it burns calories. Do not do anything because it burns calories. Unless you are actually preparing for a bodybuilding show, you do not need to worry about burning calories specifically from that. It is about building calories. Build your calories, live your life, control your calories. That's how you look at your lifestyle, because that's sustainable, right? So go for walks with family, go for park farther from work, that kind of stuff. Walk your dog. That's where aerobic comes in. And food, just make sure you love your food. Know your food in and out. And it's not that I do believe in structure. I believe that, you should have your rocks, your solid meals, and then you bring a new kind of meal in, change the macros a little bit, but you should know your macros. Like, I think we really should have a good sense of them. Protein is a must. Like, that's kind of like strength training. There's not a client I can encourage to have less than 25. I would say 20 to 25 to 30% of your calories should always be protein. You can go plus or minus from there. You can go plus from there, but I don't think anything less than 25%. It's just not going to be optimal, right? It just won't be. It doesn't matter if you're animal-based or plant-based. Everyone should have around that ratio, in my opinion. And a lot of most research supports that, for sure. For having optimal performance, for strength gains, for lifestyle, satiety. Like, I'm yet to see any research that says, hey, you're better off at 15%. The 15% rule really just comes from where they can recognize where it's like actually the minimum effective dose for existence. It's not really for optimal. So from there, one of the other lessons that's really challenging for me is that I have to admit that I don't love bodybuilding competitions, but I love building my body, right? So this is a very challenging thing for me to get so invested in all of this, because I kind of walk this line of being an average Joe that wants to be a bodybuilder, kind of. Because, like, I actually just want the physique that's a month before. That's what I want. I don't want to get my physique, although I don't need stage ready. I don't want to walk around there. I just want my physique better than when it's usually at. And so that's an important thing for me to shift or to take respect to, because that's going to be very challenging for me to do another show. So that's why I kind of backed out of this last one. after I'd already done a prep, like I already did a prep for about 5 months, and then to go in and out of one where I actually even felt like I let my physique go a little too far, I didn't feel invested enough in it, right? So that's an important concept, but I do love having a goal. So I will certainly do another show. Will I keep doing shows? That's why I call myself a wannabe bodybuilder, because I want to be one. I don't really love it, but I love building my body. So I do love parts of it, right? And I still like to be an athlete. I still like doing fast movements, and that kind of pulls away from that a little bit. But, you know, I will do another show, but, down the road, it's certainly not my lifestyle. It's not my be all end all. I'm kind of a little bit of a mix. I love the weightlifting. I love powerlifting. I love boxing. So I like kind of cycling in through all of them. But here's an important lesson I think everyone should appreciate. And this sounds biased being a coach, but it doesn't even matter if it's me. If you want to make significant changes in your life, fitness, food, business, get a coach. I cannot tell you how frustrated I was so many days waking up, looking at my physique, thinking, am I doing this right? What am I doing? I'm not any good at this. Doubting my actual identity as a coach. And, when I did have my first show, AJ Zeglin was my mentor as a strength coach at Focus Fitness, and he helped me so much throughout all of that. I would just message him. I would go to see him at least once a week, and he would do my body composition every 10 days, and we would do some posing practice. And it was really helpful to have him there. It would just be a message, just be like, yeah, you're on the right track. Yeah, it sucks. No, yeah, you're gonna feel like you have the flu sometimes when you do certain types of really low calorie, like 3 month cut. It's brutal. It's one of the worst things in the world. So having someone in your corner, having someone to reassure you, and the same things help for my business. Gavin McHale from Maverick Coaching Academy has been, irreplaceable to me, because now I have this exact Instagram account the way it is through him. So I will say that I need to be coached. So my intent is either, again, I'm going to see how the building process goes, but I'm willing to bet it probably won't be 2022. I think if I were to do this appropriately, I should go for 2023, try to build progressively, very slow building for 2 years. And then I know a coach that I was talking to about it, and he even talked about how he prefers to do 2 to 3 years of building before he even does a cut. He doesn't even do many cuts. And then he does a 6 month cut. And think about a 6 month cut and then a reverse diet out of that. Much healthier metabolism, right? Like my metabolism's never had a substantial amount of time. And that's what yo-yo dieting does. Yo-yo dieting makes you give a shit to bring it down, not give a shit. Give a shit, not give a shit. Now, if you don't build long enough in that not give a shit time, if you don't stay up there, the body's going to assume you're going to go into a fasted state again. You're going to go in this deprivation state again. And that's what keeps happening. And so give your time. And I did see a little bit of a metabolic boost in the winter, but I wonder if I did it slower and longer, where my metabolism would be today. So that was a really important thing. And that's what I've learned. And that was kind of what I really wanted to talk about and offer on the Instagram Live and on my podcast, because, people look at me for a lot of knowledge and ideas and concepts. And the funny thing is I have a lot of them, but, when it's your own, it doesn't make it easier. It actually makes it way harder. And so that's why, I love having a coach when I do go to do my next show, or I'll probably be getting, different programs probably from AJ and other people, because people still need to be coached to learn other things. And it's very important that people understand that I always struggle with my fitness in some way. Not saying that I don't feel good about it. I feel great about it compared to a lot of people, but I feel like I have so much more I need to learn and I need to grow from. And so I like to kind of just show what I've been through. And it's like lifestyle fitness and training in general, your nutrition and everything is a lifestyle journey. It's not a destination. And I know that sounds so corny and, unoriginal and the same old, but what I'm really talking about more so is because you have to find it and it's going to change, right? Like I've found points that were better than others. And then my lifestyle changed, my body changed, my goals changed. It is a constant progression or regression if you're not smart. And even for myself, even with the amount of knowledge I have, I always ask this question. I love asking people this question, especially when I had people interviewing for a job for me. And I asked them, what would you rate yourself for knowledge when it comes to training or when it comes to nutrition? I asked them both that. And I usually get an answer like a 7 or an 8. And then I always say, I'm a 3. I don't ever want to believe I'm more than a 3. A 3 out of 10, because there is so much we don't know. And the more you find out, you don't even know. The problem is when we come into this, it's like it seems so simplistic, and you can't simplify things. We got our macros, protein, fats, and carbs. You got what clean food, whole food, and it's like all these things are just like numbers on a sheet or words on a paper. Lifestyle is different. Living is different. Application isn't. You can't put emotion on a piece of paper. You can't put the intimacy that training and nutrition affects your busy lifestyle when it actually comes around. And that is so challenging. And so that's why I just like to be very open and honest to understand for everyone who looks at me is that I still don't know everything. I try to constantly find out as much as I can. And I think everyone should be willing to find out, be willing to go down that rabbit hole, because it's a huge one. But we owe it to ourselves to find out what we can. There's some high points, there's some low points. But if you believe that it's a constant progression and that's what you're aiming to do, that's what it can be. And so that's kind of mainly where I wanted to come from with the Wannabe Bodybuilder. It wasn't to necessarily talk too much about all the bro science. It was actually just to show you what I've been doing with training and my competition and stuff. And I did want to go for that show in the fall because I felt like it was undone. But it was ironic that I was listening, the guy who I wanted to do who I wanted to coach me, I listened to his podcast and he talked about building for 2 to 3 years. I'm like, you know what? That's what I need. I need to take a different approach. And I got a good, photo shoot and stuff like that coming up here. So I'm very content with what I learned and what I did. And now I have a new learning process. And so it's been a very evolutionary year. COVID was not a waste of time for me. It was transformational. I used it in every way I could. I think it was possibly the most transformational year of my life. So I'm very grateful for how it came out of it. So that's the chronicles of me as a wannabe bodybuilder. There's certainly going to be more down the road, but you'll probably hear me more of the confessions of a fat kid going over the winter here. You know how it goes. So I had some questions given to me on Instagram, and I'll go over these. There are some good ones. There are some bit odd ones. Ray Lav says, how do I grow the biggest boners? I would honestly say probably Viagra, maybe do some boner push-ups. I've also heard that there's specific Yohimbeam. Yeah, actually, I think this is a true thing that it actually improves boners. Yohimbeam. It's a supplement. It depends on where you get it from. So Ray Lavoie, look up Yohimbeam, and you might be on point if you need a bigger boner. Angelina, my wonderful girlfriend, had a question. Great questions here. She said, if you had the chance, what would you say to your old self from the first time you competed? First thing I would say is ask out Angelina because she's with you the whole time, you idiot. So that's one regret, as I was actually seeing Angelina throughout my bodybuilding prep, and I hesitated to ask her out for many months. We finally did. So, but the truth of the matter is I always have this, stupid answer, but I have to reiterate this. I don't believe in full regret. I get the regretful feeling, but the regretful feeling is the lesson that you need to be who you are today. So I'm going to always rephrase this question whenever I get it given to me. So I say, if you had the chance to talk to a version of a person like your old self, because I don't want to change my life, But if I had someone like that, what would I tell them if they were going to compete for the first time? First one is, commit to your coach. I would say being coached was so helpful for AJ. I didn't commit enough to the posing. Those are the two biggest things. Like, he was good for me. I should have been sending him routine food. I should have, gotten more programs from him. And, I did a lot of what he told me, but at the same time, more communication. That's what a coach is for. They're there to coach you, to guide you and make you feel better about it, have someone there at the show and stuff. So that's one big thing, is make sure that you have good communication with the coach. And in the posing, like, as much as I don't like it, I don't think a lot of bodybuilders love it. Some guys do, some guys don't. And you hear high level guys say, yeah, I don't really like posing, but they do it. It's kind of the dirty work, right? And it's also where you can win or lose, is no joke. Because even if you do it pretty good and you have a great physique, you'll do better than someone with a bad physique trying to do it really well. But at the same time, if you don't do it well and you have a good physique, then they don't care. And that's what happened to me. I got 4th of 4, and I know the guy who beat me out for the 3rd place wasn't bigger than me. He posed his heart out. I remember watching him do his own. I was like, man, this guy takes it serious. I'm like, well, yeah, this is a 3-4 month kiter. Maybe he was leaner, so he probably did less, but yeah, it's a very serious thing. And I was dancing to Eye of the Tiger, like literally peck dance, dan, 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 right? Like, I mean, I could have taken that a bit more serious. That was definitely a regret of mine. Other than that, I was very proud of what I did. I was very proud of battling through. There's not much more you can do. And maybe obviously bulk phase, but it was a last minute decision. So in and of itself, I did what I could with what I had. And I had some extremely tough days. So I'm pretty proud of most of what I did. That was really where I lend most of the regret there. So the next question Angelina has was, what is the hardest part of leaning out for you? Hardest part of leaning out for me, I would say, is patience, for sure. I think everyone has this problem. They don't realize that this is the number one problem, because for sure you can get good with your food. I mean, appetite's there. That's a hard part, but there's, different ways you can anchor it. So maybe that's kind of two answers there, to be honest. Some days the appetite's there, some days it's not. But then to be patient with the right amount of food, so the appetite's not there, but then you're slowly progressing enough, right? So to be patient enough with your leaning out is the hardest thing. And that's why I did so much cardio, because I wasn't being patient. And that's why the cardio disappeared. And that's why my weight would come back. So if there's anything that I see from a lot of my clients, is just like, patience is a virtue. And I love this phrase. Patience isn't waiting. Patience is how you act when you're waiting. And so that is such a valuable thing, because if you can acting patient, trusting a process, staying in line when you just don't let it bother you, that gets you to your goal, right? So if I were to say one major thing that I know I need to work on, is patience. I'm going to be patient with bulk. I'm going to be patient with the lean out. And I think one other thing I'm going to say is to maintain personal responsibility, without any contest. So for me, it's not hard when there's a contest, when there's some sort of a preparation for an event. And that's what it's like, in a weird way, it's funny how it's a safety net for me, but it's an accountability source, right? But without that accountability source, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. Or I don't know why I'm not having fun, rather, right? Like, why not another drink? Why not another piece of cake? And now that's where I'm really leaning into, is where can I take responsibility? So I would say the hardest part for leaning out for me, and to be completely honest, is patience, but also, being responsible without any specific point. And Angelina knows, like, I'll get her to team up and we'll do a date just to do a little mini competition, but you shouldn't inherently always need that, right? You should have responsibility for your action more often. So it's a great question. And also, happy anniversary, darling, as it is our 2nd year anniversary tonight. And Robin Kara has a wonderful question here. I love this question because in my new NEM series, which will actually be available if anyone wants to purchase it online by the end of the month. So you can just buy my NEM series, Nutrition, Exercise, Mindset. One of the exercise topics is, recognizing the different cardiovascular zones. And so she asked aerobic versus anaerobic, lactic versus alactic training. And I love that she even knows the difference, that she knows the terms lactic versus alactic, and there is a difference. So I like to really frame them up based on the movements that you're doing, because, or the typical kind of idea of it. But aerobic is just, I'm doing aerobic right now. I've been talking the whole time. I'm not moving much, but I'm running off my aerobic system. My heart rate might be a little bit elevated because I'm always talking. But if you're to go for a walk, anything light jog, and if you could breathe through your nose and not through your mouth, which most of us should do, and most people don't actually have a great capacity to, but it's basically anything, I would say, below, you could even say it's actually 180 minus your age, because that's where they say aerobic power is peaked. And that's a ballpark estimation. It depends on the individual, but that's basically aerobic training. I kind of categorize it in a few different zones. And then she also said anaerobic, lactic versus alactic kind of training. And anaerobic is where, lactic is where your legs are kind of getting burned and they're starting to really get tense, and you kind of have to slow down because it just burns. And that's actually what you feel when you're doing like a ton of squats. You do a ton of squats. Let's say I tell you do 30 squats, you just start burning, you stop. That's lactic acid kind of building up. I've actually heard recently that they don't really know inherently for sure it's lactic acid. It might be acidity, and it also might be muscle temperature. So it might not just be lactic acid, but the reason why she said alactic is because alactic is where you are not using the aerobic system. It's basically your power source, right? So you're doing very short bursts. So I'll break it down in a different way and see if I can explain this well. So I'll start at the top. And these are the harder conditioners. So I call it sprint training, which is like the 9 out of 10. And you can imagine your heart rate or your intensity is like 9 out of 10. Your heart rate, if you're doing it extremely explosively, goes up to that for a second or two. But sprint training or alactic training is amazing. I think everyone can benefit from alactic training. I will say that lactic, and I'll explain the other ones, how you don't have to do them. But I think everyone should walk and everyone should sprint, because the in-between will actually be taken care of for the most part by strength training. So sprint training, if you're going to do sprint training appropriately, though, what gets missed is rest. People don't rest to stay alactic. So the reason why it's A means absent, like, it doesn't exist. So there's no lactate being produced. Lactate gets produced when there's insufficient, I think it's pyruvate, so not enough glycogen, glycogen and glucose. So they recycle. Without getting too much into chemistry, basically, you go on long enough, you're going to produce some extra heat and acidity in the muscle. That's the burning feeling. So if you want to stay powerful, you give yourself a good break. So there's a few different kind of splits for this. You could go basically take 2 to 3 minute walks, rest. You go up to 4 minutes. My favorite way of doing aerobic and doing sprint training is I tell people to run as hard as they can for anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. But for the exception of the first 2 to 3, so you're warming yourself up because you don't want to pull a hamstring or something like that, and you want to focus a little bit on technique. But after the first 2 or 3, it should be, the devil's chasing you kind of speed. Like you are going as hard as you can. And if you don't have to slow down, if you don't feel like you slow down after about 10 to 20 seconds, you're not going hard enough. And this is actually the biggest problem people have with sprint training. They don't go hard enough. And so when I tell them to do it, and I tell them to take 2 to 4 minute rests, they're like, oh, well, I shortened my rest. So I was like, go harder. And some people aren't even made for that because they don't like to rest. They think it's boring. So, it's not for everyone, but it is the most beneficial way that I think you can do conditioning. Because if you just did conditioning, and conditioning is like just super intense. I don't like to call it cardio. I like to call it conditioning, because you're conditioning your body for the absolute highest intensity, doing an aerobic like exercise. It could be sprint training, it could be boxing, it could be swimming, it could be rowing, battle ropes, Jacob's ladder, anything that makes it so hard you have to slow down within 30 seconds. you're hitting a good hit zone. And then you can take 2 to 4 or 5 minute rest. I remember hearing from Joe DeFranco that he has something like a 72-to-1 ratio when he's working with athletes, which means if it's a 5-second or a 4-second split, 72 times 4 is how long his rest is. And that's where they saw the best numbers. That's where they did the best. So huge benefit to that. And then there's another simple way to do it that I've been doing a lot more recently. And it was funny because I fell into this too. I fell into this, like, if I'm not trying hard, if I don't have to slow down, it must not be hard. But I didn't realize that what you're doing is you're practicing moving fast. And if you don't stay in that alactic, meaning you don't develop lactic acid, or not a lot, because it'll develop. You need a big enough rest to reproduce your power. If you don't reproduce and clear out what was acidic in there, you're going to slow down. So recently I started doing these EMOMs every minute on the minute. So I was doing sprints where I'd run as fast as I could until I felt like I was slowing down. So it felt like about 5 to 10 seconds, usually even 5 to 8. And then I would just walk for the rest of the minute. And once the next minute hit, take off. And what was so awesome about it was you actually do get in this cardio zone after the first 4. Your heart rate's like, oh, wow, we've really got to clear this out. This is getting tougher and tougher to clear out. And so the body is going to try to clear out what all byproducts you had there from that sprint while you're walking. And then that heart rate comes down, and then you got another sprint, and it kind of summates. So the first few aren't hard, and then 4th, 5th, 6th get harder and harder, but you're still fast. You're still running pretty fast. So that's the cool part. And I did this actually just last week, and it was great. If you're going to do conditioning when you're, not feeling in great shape, you can either do the 2-minute rest or you do the EMOMs, and you could do it like I was doing it hungover. I can't like stress how nice that was, where I felt fast. I felt like I got a sweat, but I wasn't constantly breathing heavy. I was only breathing heavy for about 20 to 30 seconds. I bring my heart rate down, I feel good, and I go again. And then I did the same thing for the boxing. And it was so fun to do just explosive boxing, just hammer the speed and then catch my breath, hammer the speed, catch my breath. And I wasn't sore. I wasn't beat up. So I'll go into the next phase, because I ranted a lot about sprinting because I just think it's so important. I think people do not appreciate what it can do for them. And then the next zone I call the next zone HIT, high intensity interval training, but that's really where you're getting into lactic threshold. So that could be anywhere from 70 to 90% of your heart rate max. Some people, like marathon runners, can actually be super high in their heart rate and not go into the lactic threshold, but basically that's where your muscles are burning so much that you need to slow down. And so when you're so I call it HITs because that's what a lot of HIT training is when most general public does it. What I talked about sprint training and that alactic training, that's what true HIT should be. But most people do HIT, like if you're going to do boot camp or something like that, they're usually throwing you into a kind of a lactic anaerobic workout, because they know you want to feel tired. They know that you enjoy it when you're gassed and you're out of breath, you go short rests. And I know that feeling too. I actually really love it too, because your heart rate skyrockets, and then you got to go again and skyrockets. And it is one of the best ways to burn calories. Absolutely. But remember what I said. I don't believe we should burn calories. I think we should build calories as often as we can. I think that's where the sports really fit in. So if you're doing anaerobic lactic threshold work, it's going to prep you a lot for sports, or your sport is that. Like, I know the individual, like Robin Aston, that she does boxing, so that is what your sport is. But if your sport's that already, let's say you're prepping an athlete. If I have an athlete already doing that 2 to 3 days a week in their sport, they're going to do more alactic. They're going to do more sprint training, because I want them to be able to practice moving fast. I don't want them to practice moving slow, tired from too much lactic buildup. And then from there, you kind of have that HIT training. Again, I call that it could be anywhere you're probably going to slow down to being a 7 to 9 out of 10, anywhere's in there, because you're going to have to slow down, right? You might start 9 out of 10, and you're going to slow down. And it's most boot camps do conditioning like this. And then you go into kind of the lactic threshold, and that's what I call running, right? Or tempo running anyways, because running and tempo running is really running just fast enough where you got to breathe out of your mouth. you might slow down a little bit, but you can keep it so you're this in between of aerobic and anaerobic, and it's like this dance that your system's working with. And I usually say that zone's for runners because, again, and even running in and of itself is high impact and it's very challenging. The benefits that are seen from HIIT and doing HIIT style, like doing interval training, stimulating those really, and you can actually kind of team up a little bit of the lactic and alactic systems and do more work for your VO2 max than just tempo running can alone. So I go from sprint training's the best, HIIT training second best if you're going to try to improve conditioning. And that kind of lactic threshold is for runners. That's my personal belief, because it's hard to be in there. It's uncomfortable. But if you're running, you should get used to it, because that's what you're going to need to do in a race. If you're racing, you got to practice that. That is your sport. So you should do it. Most of us don't really need to do it, right? So then from there, it goes into aerobic power. This is an interesting one. So we're not quite in the walking pace. This is where this is a light jog pace. And if you can light jog and breathe through your nose, if you can, but again, it's 180 minus your age. And if you do low impact conditioning, it is a good calorie burner for those who are trying to burn calories, or just try to improve your aerobic system a little bit better with low impact. So, doing the elliptical or doing incline walking, swimming, biking, and getting upwards to that, or like I said, low intensity jogging, where it's not going to pull too much from your actual sport. If you're trying to improve for conditioning for sport, like if I get a boxer to run, he's not doing tempo runs, because he or she is not doing tempo runs, because that's going to pull away from your sport. You're not a runner. I want your aerobic system better. So do a run at a aerobic power level, and you're going to get a lot of benefits just from that, because that's going to sustain that endurance. It's going to help you bring your heart rate down between rounds, because you have that aerobic power capacity, more mitochondria, which is essentially the powerhouse for the cells for the aerobic system. So it does help that part of the training, but we don't need to do a lot of it to get the benefit. And then from there, running out of power. There we go. Now we're back running out of power there shortly. What's going on here? Anyways, I'm gonna have to wrap this up quick here. And then from there, just walking pace itself is really good. So I think walking and sprint training is what most people should do for athletes. I kind of talked about the other differences. So don't do it more than training. If you're going to do running, that's an intensity. If you're going to do sprint training, that's an intensity. So it's always a mixture of finding the balance where it doesn't overwork you, but it activates it, right? One more here from Robin, and I love this one. Favorite core training exercise. So she said for boxing and hockey, and I would say honestly, both are the same. So for both of those, very rotary, very anti-rotation. Most sports have this element. Any carries single arm or overhead. Like if I were to say one is be all end all, or like to me, if I were to choose one for both those sports, it'd be single arm farm carry, because you're going to work shoulder down and back. You're going to work your hip stability, your instability, and your strong grip. Okay, so to me, that's great. You could argue that maybe a cross overhead, because that's going to help set that scat for boxers. I'd take that one as well. And the anti-rotation for anyone is going to be good in those sports. Anytime it's either a carry or an anti-rotation, Palloff press is another really great one, because you're preventing the rotation. People don't realize core is an anti-rotation. So for those who haven't seen, and I know I'm talking this blog up, but I was very proud of how this came together. Take a look at my blog of abs are not core. Abs are in the core, but they're not core alone. Take a look at that blog, because it talks about anti-rotation patterns. And this kind of dives into that, gives you some examples. But single arm farmer carries or any carries overhead are really good. Absolute rigid core. It's a moving plank, right? And then any planks that are unstable, like plank rows, I'm a huge fan of. People don't realize if you're trying to keep the hips absolutely dead straight, how hard that is. And that's where I go to. And the ultimate core movement is always known as the Turkish get up. So there's always that one. That's it for today. This one went long. I knew it would. I'm a ranter. That's how it goes. This was the story of a wannabe bodybuilder. Thanks again for joining today. I really appreciate it. it was really good for me to really even talk about it out loud, because I do go through a lot of struggles. I had a client say that to me the other day. It's like, it's important to tell people that you go through these struggles too, because people are unaware that some people, even though, you could be a trainer, nutritionist, anyone in that realm, people don't know that behind the scenes, just because you have a lot of the knowledge doesn't mean that you're not struggling yourself. And I've always struggled in my own way. But I embrace that. I embrace that fitness and nutrition is going to be a lifelong journey. It's a path of self-discovery. You're going to find things that are good for you and some things that aren't as good for you. So I hope you learned a lot from this episode. I'm going to be doing more in the future. I'll continue to do some solo podcasting to answer questions and to give you my feedback on some of the ideas that I have, as I did in this episode. And I hope you liked it. Please leave some comments, like, subscribe, the old routine. But I always really appreciate if you can share it with someone, because if you can send this podcast, maybe it'll resonate with them, especially some of the messaging that I have in there about understanding the process, the result, and finding a lifestyle that you're going to continue to live with the result of the physique that you want. But remember, the process is the result. So what is that process result that you're going for? So again, I hope you learned a lot. Remember to check out my website, rqtrainingnutrition.com, for any other information on how I can help you. You can also check out my Instagram, rqtrainingnutrition. It has a ton of free information and some fun recipes and stuff like that on there, workouts. I also have a YouTube. So any ways I can help you, check it out. Thanks again for joining. Remember, it's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within the pursuit.